Welcome back inside the den. Hey, happy Thursday. We sit here 2 days away from Nevada's game against Georgia Southern. A great time, obviously, not only in the college football world, but in the football world as a whole. Obviously, tonight the Chiefs-Ravens kick off, and then tomorrow my Eagles take on the Packers. So an exciting week of football that lies ahead. Obviously, we need to take some steps back and take some inventory of the Nevada football season. They just picked up a victory over Troy, an impressive victory, just considering how things were going into halftime and how they performed in the third quarter. Just quite the turnaround. Chris, just walk me through just what that meant for the program.
Well, it was a big win. I mean, back-to-back Sun Belt champions. The Sun Belt's a really good league. I think Troy is a much lesser version this year of what it was the last couple of years because it's kind of a rebuilt roster. But being down 14-0 on the road, the offense wasn't doing much the first four possessions. And then I think the coaches deserve a lot of credit because we talked a lot going into that game. Nevada didn't exactly know what Troy was going to be doing because new coordinators, new head coach, new roster. And you could kind of see that at the beginning of the game. But once they got a feel, 4 straight possessions, they scored touchdowns, a big one right at the end of the first half to cut the deficit to 14-7. And then in the second half, that run game got going. I think that was the biggest takeaway for me. Nevada's offensive line looked really, really good. Now, I will say, Troy's interior defensive line was a clear weakness heading into that game, but Nevada was able to take advantage of it. First 200-yard rushing game since the 2021 regular season finale. So that looked like a game that Jeff Choate wants to play, where his defense is being solid, where they're running the ball, where they're being efficient with the pass game. They don't have to take too many risks. They win the special teams. Now, there was a missed field goal and a missed extra point, but probably the biggest play in that game is for the second straight week, Nevada gets basically a free possession down near the red zone because of sloppy play by the opponent's punt, snap, and hold team. It was an impressive win for Nevada. I think it was a much-needed win. If the Wolfpack had allowed Troy to come back and win that game, and that almost did happen, having to get a 2-point conversion stop with 21 seconds left, then you would be asking, okay, why can't this team finish? Because they couldn't finish against SMU. Toward the end of that game against Troy, it wasn't looking great in terms of them being able to get a stop, but they were able to figure things out and get that win, and I think that does provide a lot of confidence for this team moving forward.
Yeah, Choate kind of mentioned in his Monday presser about the roller coaster that is going through a game, being ahead, you're going to have your ups and downs, and this team is in a unique position where they've held 2 fourth-quarter leads, 11-point leads, and obviously gave up one to SMU, nearly gave up one to Troy. But you got to think about the personnel and all the players on this team. They haven't been in this position in 2 years. So it's new to them, but it does show growth that they were able to stave off the potential Troy comeback. But, yeah, that shows growth and good coaching. Obviously, different tone if we were sitting here 0-2 and, Troy got that 2-point conversion. They went to overtime and lost. Yeah, a complete different tone. But you have to be encouraged with the turnaround that happened during halftime. Just because in the first half of that game, it was a struggle offensively, and 2 early touchdowns for Troy. Just, their backs were against the wall, just early on. So just for them to come out of halftime and get that wide outside zone run to Savion Red, which he cuts back and takes it 69 yards. That was, that kind of just was a sign of things to come. And honestly, we went into this season just talking about the running backs, and we were like, Sean Dollars, Savion Red, rightfully so. But Patrick Garwo is a nice little change up in that running back room. Brings a veteran savvy, doesn't mess around, just gets upfield and gets those tough yards. So I'm kind of a fan of Patrick Garwo, and we were talking about who could potentially lead this team in rushing. Obviously, Red has a firm grasp on that right now, but Garwo could be that guy at the end of the year.
Yeah, and if you bring up the running backs to Jeff Choate, he would just say, look at the offensive line. There was a very good performance by an offensive line that's been, pretty ridiculed the last couple of years. And they were the internal team MVP on the offensive side was the offensive line. They were my team MVP in my Monday review that I did because, a lot of those runs, Savion Red 69-yard run, he wasn't touched. That was a good cutback for sure. Patrick Garwo had a pretty long touchdown, wasn't touched. You don't see that very often for Nevada the last couple of seasons, and I think that's really encouraging because if your offensive line's playing like that, everything else is going to fall into place. In terms of Garbo, yeah, I mean, he dealt with a quad injury that kept him out all of spring, kept him out most of fall. Really just came back with 2 weeks before the season started. So a slow start and a pretty crowded room. But yeah, I think he's probably the toughest runner between the tackles among all those guys in the backfield. And that's what's going to earn him a lot of carries, a couple of touchdowns against Troy. The broadcasters said both touchdowns were Savion Red. So they got to clean up their act. We did talk to Patrick about that, and he kind of mentioned that he did get some, reports back from the family that, they heard that it was the broadcaster calling him Red. Now he is number 6, or he's number 5, and Red is number 6. So it can be a little bit confusing. But, I think the run game was a huge deal. And you look at this game against Georgia Southern this week, the Eagles gave up 371 rushing yards and 7 rushing touchdowns to Boise State last week. So you have to think if you're Nevada, that's a pretty favorable matchup. Now, Georgia Southern did return all 4 of its starting defensive linemen from last year. So that should be a strength up front for the Eagles. It clearly was not against Boise State. And you can believe that they're hearing from the coaches all the time, like, if you guys don't stop the run, you're not going to be on the field. So Nevada should be able to have some running success, but I don't think Georgia Southern's defensive line is actually terrible. I think they just had a terrible game against a really good, running game with Boise State.
Yeah, really talented running fit up there in Boise. Ashton Genty, 6 touchdowns. Hey, a lot of guys' seasons worth of touchdowns there in one game. Certainly kind of the front runner of Mountain West Offensive Player of the Year. But just kind of like, giving some flowers to the Nevada offensive line. You kind of like all these elements on that line. You have extreme veteran players like Spencer Lavelle, who's a 7th-year guy, and you have young, promising upstart and talent, and like Tyson Ruffins and Timmy Tolo. You look all around that line, it's just like there's veteran leadership, and then there's young ascending talent. So there's a lot to like with that, and the more snaps that they get, the better they're going to be, and just in any game, you need these orchestrated explosives. And for the Nevada offense, that's through the rushing attack. Obviously, we'll get into this matchup with Georgia Southern. They're going to need to orchestrate some deep passes down the field. That's kind of paramount, obviously, to keep up if Georgia Southern is to put up the points that they did last week. So it's paramount for them to build on this and develop more explosives so that they can put up points to potentially not only compete in this upcoming game, but in the Mountain West Conference as a whole. A positive first step. Chris, just final thoughts on the game. Obviously, we're going to transition to just around the conference. We haven't really talked about the teams around the conference, but we have a good feel of what's going on. But just final thoughts on.
Well, you look at the rest of the Mountain West. Like 3 Mountain West schools were losing to FCS schools at halftime, and that doesn't include New Mexico, which already lost to an FCS school in week 1. Colorado State and Wyoming put up terrible performances against power conference schools. So you look at around the conference and what Nevada's done through its first 2 games, you're probably thinking, okay, well, if Nevada continues to get better, it actually might be able to compete toward the top half of this Mountain West this season. Now, the conference schedule remains very difficult. They do play the top 5 teams in the preseason poll. But, outside of what UNLV was able to do at Houston, 27-7 win, and then Boise State, obviously, dominant offensive performance against Georgia Southern, I wouldn't say that there's, Fresno State was pretty strong against Michigan as well. That was a 6-point game with about, 8 minutes to go. I wouldn't say any of the other teams are head and shoulders better in Nevada. So, I think we're in kind of week 2. Most schools are in week 1. Through 2 weeks of the season, you have to be pretty confident that Nevada can actually be competitive. This is a much better outfit than we've seen the last couple of years. And if they do continue to grow, which Jeff Choate said, they're going to be at their best at the end of the season, and that's one of his strengths is developing a team over a full year. Things could get very interesting toward the end of the season when they're playing teams like Air Force and Boise State and UNLV and what could be really high-stakes games. Yeah,
it's an interesting layout just with the conference. Things could develop and change, but you released your weekly power rankings yesterday and had Nevada 4. It's quite the climb. I mean, you probably would have to go back sometime to see Nevada did get themselves out of the 10, 11, 12 spot up into the top portion of the Mountain West. That's just kind of a vote of confidence in what we've seen these first 2 weeks, right?
Yeah, I mean, I just rank based off what they've actually put out there, not off projections. And so far, Nevada played an ACC team that's an upper tier, team in that conference and probably should have won that game. And then they went on the road against a solid Troy program that probably will be in a bowl, but probably won't compete for a Sun Belt championship, and beat them. So, that's 2 really good opponents. That's 2 pretty good performances by Nevada. So I think they deserve to be at least a top 6 upper half team in the Mountain West just based on performance to date.
Yeah, I saw recent bowl projections. They have Nevada has a 70% chance to reach a bowl.
There you go.
So that's, Vegas thinks that, there's a good shot. Obviously, things can change. I think, to navigate a first season as a head coach is to understand that there's going to be highs and there's going to be lows. So, you can't get ahead of yourself on your skis. Obviously, games can be different. Certainly with this Georgia Southern game coming up, but just encouraging signs all around. I also just wanted to bring up the local kid, Marcus Bellin. He's been a kind of a spark on the team, just both in special teams and on offense. Just a good slot receiver that gets open in space. So, and obviously he had that important touchdown against Troy. So a unique element to the offense, despite his shorter stature, but he's an explosive player.
Yeah, big fumble recovery as well.
Yeah.
Like if Nevada loses that fumble, so the punt snap goes through the hands of the Troy punter, Nevada's next play, Savion Red fumbles. If Troy gets that ball right back, Troy probably wins that game. That was like a free 7 points for Nevada in a game that ended up being decided by 2. That went right to a Troy player. For whatever reason, he couldn't fall on it, but Marcus was able to dive in from the corner and get the ball. And I think that's kind of what his role is, like whatever you need. I think he's going to be a really good punt returner. I wouldn't be surprised if he returned a punt for a touchdown this season. And he's kind of emerged as that number 3 wide receiver. I mean, you've got 2 good outside receivers, and now you have Marcus in the slot, and Jace Henry's been really good as a tight end, a couple of touchdowns. So there is a little bit more depth in the passing game. I do think injuries will play a big role on this team. If they stay healthy, they should be pretty good, but there isn't a lot of depth at certain positions, including pass catching. So I do think Marcus has been a big addition to the wide receiver group as someone who not a lot of people even knew about when fall camp started like 45 days ago.
Yeah, I mean, we saw him at camp and saw him over the course of that, but you just didn't realize just how far ahead he was on the depth chart and how much faith that they had in him. So we certainly projected that, like Hayes would be the guy coming out of the slot. But, just seeing Bellin represent Truckee like that, it's definitely cool to see. But let's talk about, just the guy throwing the ball. Because Brendan Lewis, obviously, fall camp, had an amazing fall camp, according to coaches. But just to see his game develop from the struggle that was last year to this year and being efficient. And the term game manager, people kind of like can view that as a negative stigma. But just to, we completed a high percentage. I believe he went 17 for 20.
Yeah.
Not amazing yardage per se, but to have 2 touchdowns and to be efficient in the red zone and not make the mistakes, I think that's, just the, right recipe to lead a potentially good Nevada offense. Obviously, in an ideal world, you love for your guy to get 300, 400 yards. But in this run-first offense, you want your quarterback not to make mistakes.
Yeah, he hasn't. He hasn't made any mistakes. Nevada doesn't have any turnovers through 2 games. That's been a huge key in them playing really well. He's played clean games. In that first game against SMU, his legs were a big weapon. His arm was more of the weapon against Troy. As you mentioned, the efficiency in terms of completion percentage was great. He was able to get the ball down the field on a couple of plays. I thought the Jace Henry throw was a really, really big one, a really good one. And, yeah, he's played basically error-free football thus far. And you got to give the offensive line some credit. They've only allowed 1 sack as well, so he's probably been comfortable back there. And that's what they're asking for out of the passing game, is not to necessarily go and win the game. Step 1, don't lose it by turning the ball over, which he hasn't done. Step 2, add that dual threat ability, which is legs, which he was able to do. I know he had to come out of the game with a little bit of an ankle, so it'll be interesting to see how healthy he is for this game against Georgia Southern. And then number 3, make the big plays when they're available and be good on key downs. Red zone, third down. Nevada is so much better than they were last year. 7 red zone touchdowns in 8 appearances. Third downs, they're over 50%. They were bottom 10 in the nation last year in third down conversion rate. So he's being good on key downs. I think, they'll add a little bit more explosives as the season goes on, but they're not asking for too much of that. Now, maybe in this game that's required. If Georgia Southern puts up 45 against Nevada like it did against Boise State, you are going to have to get a little bit more out of your passing attack, but that's not necessarily how Nevada wants to run its offense. So he's been fantastic, and there are questions about, could Chubba Purdy, take the job, A.J. Bianco. We even talked about Anthony Grigsby Jr. There's been no reason to doubt that Brendan Lewis is the guy to lead this offense, at least through the first 2 games.
Yeah, and another element to the offense that kind of wrap up before we get into this Georgia Southern preview is that with the change of rules and pace of play, right? With the lack of the stoppage of the clock on the first down, it's almost like you can control the pace of the game just with your run game. Just it's control time of possession. Now, time of possession hasn't been lopsided one way or the other in either game, but just it's an advantageous thing to soak up clock, go on these orchestrated drives that you're relying on your line and you're relying on Savion Red and Garo or whoever's hot that day, and to give your defense a breather. So it's definitely a different element of college football than we're traditionally used to, because it's just with the stoppage of clock, there would be like at least a few more drives in a game, which would put more pressure obviously on the defense and certainly on an offense. But it's just an interesting thing.
I think Nevada only had 9 offensive possessions against Troy, so
Yeah.
they had 4 touchdowns. They had a turnover on downs on the other side of the 50, and then they had a missed field goal on the other side of the 50. So you look at that, 4 plus those 2, 6 of your 9 went past midfield and were successful drives. And then you look at the SMU one, only 3 of their 12 possessions, they had more than 20 yards. So there was certainly growth from game 1 to game 2. The level of competition was down a little bit.
Right.
But, this is Georgia Southern defense this weekend that had a terrible first performance. So you should expect a little bit more growth. And maybe Nevada's able to, get out of the 20s and into the 30s for the first time under Jeff Choate.
Yeah, let's get into this Georgia Southern preview. Before we really dig into it, we had an opportunity throughout the week to talk to Choate and several players. Let's go ahead and play that sound.
Coach Helton's a guy that's coached a lot of football, had a lot of success. You can see his DNA on this team. A lot of playmakers on the offensive side of the ball. They had 2 first-team all Sun Belt preseason selections. Their running back, number 25, I think he's a really, really good runner. I mean, this guy's a big, physical, fast guy. And I think he creates problems. He's good out of the backfield. He's a willing blocker. He's good in protection. He can run downhill. He can run wide zone. So I think he's a complete back. I'm really impressed with him as a player. They had number 2 as a preseason all Sun Belt pick, and he's this team's got really good team speed, and that shows up especially at the skill positions. And so both he and number 1 are guys that I think create matchup issues for us, and we're going to have to do a good job of identifying where they're at. Their quarterback, number 12, he was a little streaky early in the game against Boise, and then he caught fire. And I think he's maybe better off schedule than he is within the scheme. He's a very good runner. We had issues leveraging the quarterback last week with Goose, and this guy's a much better runner than the guy that we played last week at Troy.
I seen that they have a good offense. They have a pretty good running back, pretty good little receivers too. So I just feel like if we just need to be locked in on all the details, getting our assignments right, making sure we don't miss them tackles I was missing last week, and just everyone on in their 111th.
It's easy to kind of overlook that kind of thing, kind of look at the statistic and feel like you're going to be able to do the same. And I feel like for us, the biggest thing is just to do what we do. They might have allowed that many rushing yards, but that doesn't define them as a defense. And I feel like as long as we're doing what we need to do, then everything's going to sort itself out.
They got speed. They got a solid defense, good D-line. They gave up a few rush yards, but also the first game of the season. So I'm sure they'll go back and fix that up this week. I don't know too much about their offense, but I saw they put up a good amount versus Boise, so we're going to have a good game this week, I believe.
We know they're a great team, and they play hard, and they're a big team, physical. So we just have to focus on, at first, owning ourselves, knowing what we can do better, correcting ourselves from last week, and just executing our plays, and then everything else will take care of itself.
And you gotta love the sound. Obviously, just Coach Choate just naming off numbers, not memorizing.
Yeah, we'll
players.
give you some names.
Yeah, but yeah, certainly, I think the players understand the matchup that's in front of them. Obviously, they made a point that it's just like they may have given up a lot of rushing yards and rushing touchdowns last week, but it doesn't certainly translate to this week, and they understand the challenge that's in front of them.
Yeah, Georgia Southern coming off back-to-back 6 and 7 seasons, 3 and 5 in the Sun Belt. They're under Clay Helton. He's the former USC head coach. I don't think he kind of has a reputation at being great at getting the most out of his talent, but I would say this is a very talented team. So if you look at last week, Nevada played Troy, 3 preseason all Sun Belt picks. This week against Georgia Southern, same conference, 9 preseason all Sun Belt picks. So you're talking about a lot more all-conference talent in terms of returning players and certainty. They've got a all-conference running back in Jalen White. That's the number 25 that Coach Choate talked about. He's got more than 2,300 yards in his career. They've got an all-conference wide receiver, Derwin Burgess Jr. He's a first-teamer. He's got more than 150 catches, almost 2,000 yards in his career. They've got two really good offensive linemen at center and left guard who are on the preseason all-conference team. And then they added a left tackle from the SWAC, Alabama State, who was all-conference there. So the left part of the line is good. Right part of the line, pretty unproven. And then quarterback J.C. French, he was a transfer from Memphis prior to last year, got his first career start against Boise State, and he played really, really well. 322 passing yards. He had 3 touchdowns, 1 rushing, 2 throwing. He's got more mobility than Nevada has really seen thus far this season. So it's a really talented offense. And Nevada's defense has been pretty good, but we've kind of seen in the fourth quarter, not so good when teams like get into pass mode.
Right.
When they're like, okay, we're just going to throw the ball now, they've had success. And this team is going to be in pass mode from the start. 50 attempts against Boise State, more than 40 passing attempts per game last year. Clay Helton teams, they want to throw the ball 65% of the time. So it is going to be a little bit of a different challenge for Nevada's defense. That secondary has been really good, but I feel like, facing a team that's going to come out and throw first will be a different wrinkle, and it'll be interesting to see how Nevada does stand up against them.
Yeah, it's interesting. Obviously, we made a lot about the offense's matchup against the defense, just with the rushing attack. But yeah, this game will be made versus in the Georgia Southern's offense versus the Nevada defense, or at least pass defense. But just looking around the Nevada defense, it's certainly better than we expected heading into the season. Just with the guys stepping up, and the secondary's been sticky, as players have said. Keaton Crawford is you had a piece on him earlier this week on NevadaSportsNet.com. A really highly rated guy according to PFF. Flies around, gives you that dual ability to play on offense and on defense. But just a really good safety, a rangy guy. So certainly excited to see the type of plays he can make in this game. But just how about that defensive front? Obviously Caden Johnson had that big play to end the game with the 2-point conversion. He's getting some more pass rush there. But who I was impressed with last week is Christopher Ross. Had good plays both on run defense and as a pass rusher just to close in the pocket. So they're really getting production out of the guys that came through the transfer portal. Former Power 5 guys. Obviously, Henry Kahifo can be considered that. Obviously, made a roundabout way back to Nevada. But this will be a big test on the pass rush, in terms of just getting upfield and attacking J.C. French, their quarterback, who has the ability to extend the play. So keep your lanes, make life tough on him, but do not give him an alley to possibly extend a play. So it'll be a lot of pressure on this pass rush.
Yeah, Nevada just 1 sack this season, and they allowed more than 5.5 yards per carry last week against Troy. So I do think that defensive line, which I thought they played a little bit better against SMU, they're going to have a big role in this game in terms of making French uncomfortable. As you heard in Jeff Choate's commentary, he feels like French is a little bit better off schedule than on schedule. So even if you do get a pass rush on him, he's able to improvise and make things happen. But making him uncomfortable and only a second college start will obviously be a big deal for Nevada. And then you look at the Georgia Southern defense, like you might look at them giving up 57 or 56 points against Boise State and say, they're terrible. But they had 3 of the 11 first-team All-Sun Belt preseason picks on the defense, and then a second-teamer as well. They have a linebacker, Marquise Watson-Trent, who was honorable mention All-American last year. He's had more than 110 tackles in back-to-back seasons. He's a very talented player. They got 2 really good defensive linemen who were first-team all preseason Sun Belt. I'd say their outside cornerbacks are probably the biggest weakness on this team. So we'll see if Nevada is able to attack them with their outside receivers. But Jaden Smith and Cortez Braham both have had solid games, and I think they'll have some opportunities in this one. You would think it's going to be a higher scoring game. I think the total's like 59. Nevada a 1-point underdog. So it's going to come down
shifted. Earlier this week they were.
Nevada was a 3-point underdog and now a 1-point underdog.
Okay,
which I think that seems about fair.
Yeah.
Usually early on, if a team's like a really big surprise, you can get some value on them.
Yeah.
I don't think there was any way Nevada should have been a 9-point underdog last week. That's why we both picked them to win.
Mm-hmm.
I think Georgia Southern's a more talented team than Troy. I think they're more experienced. The big question was quarterback, and obviously French played pretty well against Boise State, and should be a pretty good quarterback in that league as well. So It'll be a nice test for Nevada. I think it's like a regular kind of like Mountain West quality team. If Nevada's able to win this game, beat two above average Sun Belt teams, that kind of shows that they're capable of doing some stuff in the Mountain West as well. Because I think top to bottom, the Sun Belt is, probably as good as the Mountain West.
Yeah.
Might not have like the Boise State and UNLV caliber team. I don't know that there's like a clear favorite,
Right.
maybe Appalachian State. But yeah, it's a nice quality opponent. Nevada's going to not have to turn the ball over. You don't want to give up extra possessions. They're going to have to be good in the red zone like we talked about. You look at Georgia Southern last week, 6 of their 7 red zone appearances ended in touchdowns, and then they had a field goal on top of that. So I think it's going to come down to those key downs in the red zone on third down. Whoever doesn't turn the ball over, maybe special teams plays a big factor. DeAndre Buchanan is Georgia Southern's kick returner, 27 yards per attempt in his career, had a return touchdown last season, probably one of the top 10 return men in all of college football. So I think that will be a big factor. Their kicker is a new guy, Gavin Stewart from Georgia Tech, maybe not as proven. Obviously, Matthew Killam had a couple of issues last week. So I think all those like little things are going to play a big one, because I don't see either of these teams straight up blowing each other out. I think it's going to be another close, competitive 4-quarter game. And I think that will be good for Nevada. As you said, to start this thing, they hadn't been in a lot of close games the last couple of years. I think the more times you get that experience in what they're calling the preseason, the non-conference games, that will make you so much better for Mountain West play when you're trying to win a championship. So, yeah, I would expect this to be a really fun, high-scoring game, and we'll see who comes out on top. But the way Nevada's played so far, I think it has to have a lot of confidence that if it plays like it has the first 2 games, mistake-free games, I think they think that they're going to win.
Yeah, it'll be interesting come Saturday. Obviously, I predict more passing attempts than actual rushing attempts on Saturday. That'll just be
Nevada
for
or
Nevada
for overall?
For Nevada.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, just because they're gonna have to keep pace. So
I think that'd probably be a bad thing if that happened.
it would be a bad thing, but that's my. I'm just assuming that Georgia Southern's gonna come in here and put up some
Be able
points.
to put up some points.
So it's gonna be a track race, and obviously Choate said he'd prefer not to have a shootout.
Yeah.
In his ideal world, but I have a feeling it's going to be, if it was a shootout for Boise State, it might be a shootout for Nevada. So a lot more passing attempts, but certainly saw some signs of growth last week with Brendan Lewis. And he had several third down and longs that he connected with both Jaden Lewis and Cortez Braham. So some signs that they're, pushing down the ball down the field. And, that first week, there was some growing pains. I mean, just rough attempts down the field. I mean, like to end the game, just sailed that, streak route just to the sideline to end. But, I think they're still going to implement their screen games, but I think they're developing with their, intermediate to deep passes. So we'll see how it goes. It should be an interesting matchup. Have you made your prediction yet? Have you written that article yet?
I haven't, but I can do it here on the show. I'll go Nevada 31, Georgia Southern 28. So if you know the history of this series, it is kind of interesting because both these teams were FCS powerhouses. Georgia Southern more so than Nevada. Georgia Southern won 6 FCS national championships, including the 1990 championship over Nevada. They also beat Nevada in the 1986 FCS semifinals before winning the championship the next week. So they've only played twice before, both in the FCS, both in the playoffs, both at Georgia Southern. So I don't think Nevada winning this game gets it a national championship or fixes those heartbreaking losses. But I do think Nevada will win a close one, 31-28. I'm banking on Nevada not turning the ball over, not making major mistakes, playing the cleaner game. And, just given how Georgia Southern played defense last week, I think there'll be a much better defensive effort from them, but I think Nevada does just enough to score enough and win the game. What about you? What's your
shootout?
What's your call?
42-40, Georgia Southern.
Okay,
Yeah.
42-40.
Yeah. I got to be a little different. It probably wouldn't be a scoregami, but I think
So you're going Georgia Southern. This is the first time we've disagreed.
Yeah, I just just on paper the matchup doesn't favor Nevada, just in terms of the sheer offense that they can string together. And obviously you might be yelling at the wherever you're listening to this or watching this, but it's just it might be a little much for Nevada to try and keep up with. I like the offense, I do, and the rushing attack is great. Just with the lack of explosives, it's going to be hard to kind of keep up.
If Nevada puts up 40 points and loses, I don't think Jeff Choate's going to have a very happy press conference. So
No,
you'll be in that press conference.
He'll blame me.
No, I won't blame you, but that would be a tough result for him to swallow, given that he's a defensive-minded guy and
Yeah, but
wants to keep the score a little bit lower.
with these results, they've moved to 3-0 against the spread. So, actually, wait, no, it's a 1 point, right? So,
Yes.
so I guess loss against the spread.
So you're
Vegas
calling
gets-
for Georgia Southern straight up
Yeah.
and against the spread. I'm
Yep.
calling for Nevada straight up and against the spread.
Yep.
We'll see what happens at the end of the game.
Yeah, we'll see. It should be an interesting matchup. Nevada could very well win this game, folks. Certainly a well-coached outfit, and who knows? The Russian attack could just be too much for Georgia Southern. So, I guess we'll find out Saturday. But any last thoughts?
No, I think it's going to be an interesting game. I think it's going to be an exciting game, and I'm interested to see how many fans show up because I think you are seeing a little bit more buzz around town for Nevada football. I think people are really enjoying Jeff Choate. Obviously, we've got to talk to him really for like the last 9 months and kind of gotten to know his personality. And now I think fans are tuning in a little bit more now the games are going on, and I think they like what they've seen from not only the play on the field but kind of what he says in the media and kind of his personality. And so you see. The post-game or the post-game interview from ESPN Plus after the win over Troy. And, the guy who was interviewing said first win. He had to correct him. Had a lot of wins at Montana State. He's I think he's got people a little bit more excited about Nevada football than they were 2 weeks ago.
Certainly. So we'll find out Saturday. But thanks, folks, for tuning in. We'll be back next time on Inside the Dome.